In the name of God, Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer. Amen. Please be seated. Well, thank you for being here this morning on this beautiful, beautiful Easter morn. A few years ago, the USA Television Network began a new reality TV series, as if we needed another reality TV series. It was hosted by a well-known quarterback, a fellow by the name of Kurt Warner. And the premise of this series was to offer people a second chance. So they would bring people on the program who had somehow failed to fulfill their dreams, or weren't able to accomplish something of great importance that they wanted to accomplish, or that in some other way had some brokenness, some displacement in their life that needed healing. And whether or not people actually were able to achieve that which they set out to achieve, I think it's true to say that all of us can identify with the longing, the desire for a second chance, a fresh start, a new life, if you will. There are a number of different stories in the Bible, the Hebrew and Christian scriptures, that are stories about people having a fresh start in life or a second chance, an opportunity to live out of a new and different value system, a new and different set of priorities than they lived out of in their earlier part of their life. If we go all the way back to the time of Joshua, roughly 1,000 years before the birth of Jesus, we find in the book of Joshua the story of Rahab. Now, you may remember that Rahab was a single woman living in the ancient world, and that by definition meant that she had a very difficult time surviving. She was forced to survive by selling her body on the streets and living as a prostitute. And even then and there, 3,000 years ago, halfway around the world, prostitution was not an honorable profession. So she was treated like some kind of pariah in her own community. From the Jewish perspective, it was even worse than that, because Rahab was a Gentile living in a Gentile city, that is, the city of Jericho. And Jericho was in the crosshairs of the Israelite military. And they would soon be approaching the city in order to take it by force. Well, Rahab somehow heard of the God of Israel and became intrigued, felt drawn to this God, this God of the Hebrews who delivered them out of Egypt. And when the Israelites sent spies into Jericho to do reconnaissance work in anticipation of their siege of the city, Rahab, because of her growing affection for the God of Israel, agreed to allow the spies, a couple of men who had been sent into the city, to stay in her home, where she hid them and protected them. Well, again, according to as the story goes in Joshua, the Israelites indeed did take the city of Jericho, and Rahab and her family were allowed to live, and Rahab was allowed to start a new life. And so the fall of the city actually marked a new life, a new beginning for Rahab among a new people with a new God. If we leapfrog forward about 1,000 years to the time of Jesus, we come to another figure that we may not have thought about for a long time, and that is the figure of Zacchaeus. Remember when you were in church school, singing that little song about Zacchaeus was a wee little man? Well, this wee little man was a tax collector. And tax collectors were hated. And not for the reason you think they were hated. Everybody has to pay taxes. But they were hated for two reasons. First of all, they were hated because they were seen as traitors. The tax collectors in first century Palestine were normally Jewish men who had agreed to do the dirty work for the Romans. Now the Romans were Roman occupiers, right? They were hated as invaders of the nation of Israel. So anyone that collaborated with them, worked for them, did anything in support of Roman occupation, Roman domination, was seen as a traitor to Israel. Tax collectors worked for Rome. That was bad enough, but it gets worse, a lot worse. And that is that tax collectors like Zacchaeus grew wealthy. They became rich men because they were given the authority to keep for themselves any amount of money they were able to collect above and beyond that required by the empire. So the empire would give each tax collector a quota, a certain amount that he had to collect for his district. Anything above that he could keep for himself. And he had the Roman authorities, and therefore Roman coercion, Roman threat, fear of Rome behind him. So, first century Jewish tax collectors were seen not only as traitors, but sort of a professional extortionist class. They extorted the poor, the middle class. They extorted everyone in Israel in order to become rich themselves. So you can imagine what the buzz was like around town when Jesus showed up and said, Zacchaeus, I'm going to stay in your home. But that is exactly what happened according to the Gospels. Why would Jesus do this? Well, I think the answer is obvious. It was to not only to declare to everyone that God can find the goodness in us no matter what we're doing, but also to give Zacchaeus, I think, a second chance. To give Zacchaeus an opportunity to reflect on his own life and to determine that the life he had been living up to then was death and that new life was possible. In other words, to give Zacchaeus a chance to choose, to lay aside his life of corruption, greed, and selfishness in order to choose the abundant life that Jesus lived and taught, the abundant life of love, compassion, mercy, and justice. So Zacchaeus, I think, was being offered a new life, a chance at resurrection. I think all of these stories, all of these biblical stories, like this that deal with second chances, new opportunities, new possibilities, a new life, the possibility of a new life, are all, in a sense, resurrection stories. Now, I know that probably most of my colleagues this morning are using an interpretive approach to resurrection stories that begins in supernaturalism. In other words, probably what people are saying most of the time in most pulpits across the country this morning is that the story we read in Luke's Gospel, the stories that you might, the passages that you might read in other parts of the New Testament that reference resurrection, that these are historical accounts to be interpreted literally, to be interpreted miraculously or supernaturally. That is, that God set aside the laws of nature, biology, and physics in order to resuscitate a corpse. Now that certainly may be the case. I'm not old enough or smart enough or experienced enough to know with certainty that that's the wrong interpretive approach. It's just not the approach that makes sense to me and to many others. What makes more sense to me is to interpret religious language and imagery, to interpret religious literature through the lens of the humanities. That is, to understand that even religious literature is literature. It is literature written by people, for people, and ultimately about people. So when we get into religious resurrection language and story, we are reading stories about what it is to be human, human hope, human fulfillment, human abundance, human life in its ultimate sense. We're reading story about what it means to be human with this ongoing sense of call, what I call the sense of call, this yearning in us to follow the path of the sacred, to understand what that means for us in our lives, and to do that in a way that brings completion and fulfillment to our lives. Now, if we interpret resurrection language through the humanities rather than through supernaturalism, we can ask a different set of questions because we hear it in a different way. It opens up the possibility of us asking questions like this. Well, am I carrying a dream inside of me? Some dream deep in my own heart and mind and soul that has laid in the grave too long and needs to come out and be actualized? Is there some part of my life, maybe a significant part of my life, but is there some part of my life that needs to die and be put in the grave so that something new can rise and I can find a fresh start, a second chance, a new life? And we hear these kind of questions bubbling up in us. And we realize that just perhaps we too have a longing for deep inside of us for something new and something life-giving. But we also become conscious that something stops us. Something seems to get in the way. We realize that there are parts of our lives that we need to bury in the grave so that new life can be resurrected. But something holds us back. And what that is for you, no one knows but you. It may be your age, it may be your family situation, it may be your education or the kind of education you got or did not receive. It may be a fear that you have. Who knows? Only you can go inside yourself and discern what is it within me that is obstructing, that's got me stuck, that's got me locked into a place where I am not giving myself a second chance at life. I'm not willing to let resurrection be a possibility for me. I'm going to close with a true story. I'm going to tell the story in the first person. It's the story of an ordinary woman by the name of Rachel Gonzalez. So, just pretend that I'm Rachel for a minute. So I for many, many years, I worked with a group of the same people in my office. There was a group of 10 of us, and for 15 years we worked together. And that group of people became my family. I mean, things at home were pretty awful. I had a son that I loved, but I'd been in a marriage that had gone bad just a few years into it and had been bad these many years. My husband was most of the time unemployed. He was verbally and emotionally abusive and distant. And the only way I was able to cope day in and day out, week in and week out, was because of my family, if you will, my community at work. And this community, well, we did everything together. We celebrated birthdays and celebrated anniversaries. We went to sports events together. We spent a lot of time together, both inside the workplace, but also outside. We were community for each other, and the strength of that community helped me to cope. But then one day, something happened that changed all that. Everybody in the office wanted to buy into a pool. Everybody was supposed to put in $20, and we were all going to go in together to buy lottery tickets. And then if any one of us, struck gold, then we'd all share the proceeds. But my son wanted to play soccer, and I was having a real hard time with the bills. It took everything I could do to just scrape together enough to get by week to week. And quite honestly, I didn't have the $20. My son wanted to play soccer. I needed the $20 for his registration fee. So I told the rest of the office, I'll pass on the lottery and for them to go on their way without me. Well, as you can already guess, the office crew won the lottery. And the 9 of them were to split $170 million among themselves. Well, when you come into that kind of money, your life changes, right? Lots of things change. And one by one, fairly soon after that, people began to leave the office to go do other things. Meanwhile, things got worse at home for me. My husband was still unemployed, but now he was furious. I mean, he was just crazy angry that I had opted out of the lottery. And so his attacks became more cruel and more frequent. In the meantime, I was watching this family of mine, this support community that I'd had all these many years, disintegrate right in front of me as one person after another left to go do other things. And I'm telling you, I fell into a deep, dark hole. It was hard for me to just get out of bed in the morning. And the only thing that got me out of bed in the morning was I'd look at my son and think, well, I've got to get out of bed to provide for him. Well, I stayed in that deep, dark hole for a long time. Boy, was I full of self-pity. I felt so bad for myself. I was just sad, period, depressed, anxious, scared, didn't know what to do. And then one day, I heard a little voice somewhere inside of me. Call it my heart or my soul or my mind. But I heard a little voice that said, get up off the floor and go claim a new life for yourself. And I don't even know why, but that day, at that time, I did. I got up off the floor, dusted myself off, went down and filed for divorce, got a second job so I could feed my son and myself and pay the rent, and I got on with my life. And I'm not going to tell you it was easy. It was a struggle. But it seemed like every day things got a little bit better. And you know what? I started to discover all these things about myself that I had never known about myself. You know that I wrote and published a children's book, and it has done very well. I've discovered that I'm really good at designing jewelry and putting that stuff together, and I've started a little business doing that, and it is really starting to pay off. And I have found a place where my love for humanity can be expressed. I have this organization that I volunteer with volunteer about an hour or two every week to an organization that specifically devotes itself to providing educational materials for the children in the Gaza Strip. It's been an incredible ride. Reminds me of a quote from Hemingway. Hemingway once said that life breaks everyone, and some are stronger in their broken places. And I'm here this morning to tell you that I am stronger this morning in my broken places. I am a better, richer, happier, more deeply satisfied human being because I listened to that little voice inside of me that said, get up off the floor, dust yourself off, and go claim a new life for yourself. And I know now that I will always follow that voice for the rest of my life. That's her story. True story. So, to wrap things up this morning, I only have 8 more points, and then we'll finish this thing up. I hope and pray for all of us that we will use this Easter season to look for resurrection in our own lives, to look for those places in our life where a new set of priorities, a new set of habits maybe, a new set of values need to be operationalized. Don't let this Easter season come and go without taking some time to reflect on your life and to ask yourself as honestly as you can, is there some part of my life that needs to be buried 6 foot under so that some other part of my life may rise again? Happy Easter to all of you. Amen.